Welcome to the 700 Club. Hamas terrorists have admitted they used civilians as human shields against Israeli forces in Gaza. The confessions were revealed just as Israel is entering a new phase in the war against Hamas.
That phase is good news for Israeli citizens who've been evacuated from the combat zone. Many of them are soon going to get to go home. Julie Stahl brings us the story from Jerusalem.
The Israel Defense Forces announced that they're releasing 5 brigades from combat in the Gaza Strip as the military is gaining more control on the ground. However, the IDF says the war against Hamas will likely continue throughout the rest of the year. And as the IDF lowers the intensity of the fighting in northern Gaza, Israelis in 6 communities between about 2.5 to 4 miles from the Gaza Strip will be allowed to return to their homes after being evacuated following the Hamas massacre on October 7th.
In accordance with the recommendations given by the IDF and the defense establishment, we will soon be able to return communities home in areas within a range of 4 to 7 kilometers north of the Gaza Strip to their homes.
And while Israel's military pursues Hamas, the country's High Court of Justice struck down the law passed by the Knesset to remove some of the Supreme Court's power. The measure would forbid justices to negate a law because they don't find it reasonable, but the High Court voted 8-7 against the law, which fueled months of anti-government protests before the war. But the battle over the High Court's power may not be over, although that fight may not continue until after the Hamas war is over. Meanwhile, the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier is returning home after an extended deployment. The Ford was sent to the Mediterranean to be within striking distance of Israel after the October 7th Hamas massacre. And Israeli fighter jets struck terrorist infrastructure in Lebanon on Monday and Tuesday, where Iranian-backed Hezbollah terrorists were operating. Back in Gaza, the Israeli military kept up its attacks on Hamas and revealed what it learned about how the terrorists hide among civilians.
During the operation in Khan Yunis, our forces identified suspects who were hiding among women and children. During interrogation, it was revealed that they were terrorists, some of whom participated in the terrorist attack on October 7th. Whether the terrorists are hiding in tunnels, hospitals, or by civilians, we will reach them.
The IDF also released footage of the interrogation of 2 Gazans who gave details of how Hamas used civilians against Israeli forces. An Islamic Jihad member told how Hamas stopped Gazans from evacuating and instead transferred them to the Shifa hospital. The terrorists stayed underground there until they realized the IDF was coming, and then they mingled among the civilians. A Hamas member told a story about a family who didn't want a Hamas operative to plant a bomb by his apartment because his children were inside. The terrorist told him he would put it between the father and his wife instead. And when the man kept arguing, the Hamas member shot him in the leg. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Please remember that Hamas is the government of Gaza. Yes, they are a terrorist group. They've been identified as a terrorist group for years. But they're still the government. And when you have that kind of government that says we're going to hide behind civilians, we're going to put military installations in hospitals, in mosques, in churches, in public places, we're going to hide, use the civilians as shields. All of that is a war crime under international law. Let us please keep that in mind as Israel continues this horrible war. From the beginning of it, October 7th, I never thought I'd see anything like that in my lifetime, but here it is. Hamas has to go. And while it goes, please remember the remaining hostages that they're keeping. All the calls for ceasefires, all the calls for withdrawals, please do not ever ignore Israeli citizens are still in captivity. While Israel is battling Hamas, another terrorist threat is rising in the north. Hezbollah has been launching rocket and missile strikes against Israel from Lebanon. One of the worst attacks occurred on December 26th. Chuck Holton reports from northern Israel.
An ancient Christian village is the most recent target after hostilities intensified at the Israeli-Lebanese frontier. Hezbollah-fired missiles struck St. Mary's Greek Orthodox Church in the village of Ikrit. The first missile wounded an 80-year-old man, and when the IDF went to assist, A second missile wounded 9 soldiers.
The church is kind of on top of a hill, then there is a valley, and then Lebanon is on top of the second hill. So you can see, if you stand there at the church, you can see the town in Lebanon from where these missiles were launched very, very clearly.
The IDF responded, firing tank and artillery rounds. This eruption of violence follows months of rising tensions along the border.
This is a very close region to the border. We are 2.2 miles from Israeli-Lebanese border here, inside Israel. And these communities, all of them are evacuated. The same threat like Hamas did in our southern community, they can do it here as well.
In the Maronite Christian village of Jish, life has been upended.
Most of the people evacuated, and our town actually, businesses are closed. You hardly find people coming from outside, and restaurants, businesses work maybe half-time, like half-day. They have schools closed. The children are at home. Many people took their families to Haifa or other further places from the border because they don't want to hear these bombings and artillery shootings and the shooting from Hezbollah to our communities and to our region, which cause a lot of actually explosions around.
Hezbollah is launching these anti-tank missiles from the towns. Hezbollah is hiding these missiles inside the towns, inside the homes. At the same day that the church was hit, there was a launching of anti-tank missiles in elsewhere on the border from a mosque.
Leaders warn such violence threatens all groups regardless of faith and puts increasing pressure on the Israeli government to stop the violence. In recent days, IDF airstrikes have struck dozens of Hezbollah sites inside Lebanon.
Every day you hear the explosion, you feel as if you're in a war zone. Half of the people in the community are not there, and it's a challenge. How do you treat that? Nobody compensates them. This is true for everybody, not just for the Christians.
This country is the only state that actually Christians, as a minority in it, feel safe and feel freedom and enjoy democracy and values of Western values that we share together with the other Western world. And if no state will exist here, Christians will not exist as well. So our obligation as a Christian community is to defend our home, our family, and Israel is our home. We need to defend it together with the Jews.
With more than 80,000 Israelis displaced from the north and daily attacks continuing, most feel a diplomatic solution is unlikely.
Any diplomatic solution will actually be fooling ourselves, or Hezbollah fooling us, or Hezbollah fooling all of the rest of the world. The previous diplomatic solution was not a solution. It didn't have a deadline, and there was no enforcement forced on the ground. I don't see anybody's doing that except for the IDF. I don't know whether it's ground incursion or not, but I think that a military operation is needed, and we are totally aware of the risks here, okay? We are aware of the price.
From northern Israel, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
I hope the whole world listens to the testimony of that Maronite Christian. Here is a Christian community that has been occupying, living in that land. I shouldn't say occupying. They've been living there. It's their land. It's their town. Since 402 A.D., that's when the Maronites came from Syria and decided we needed to convert. They needed to convert people in Lebanon and northern Israel. Now, here's someone who has they've been in part of a community for 1,600 years in Israel. And they say our best hope for the future is the modern state of Israel. The facts are quite clear. Israel is the only country in the Middle East where the Christian population is thriving, and not just thriving, increasing. All the other areas, you're seeing a decrease, whether in Syria or Iraq or Jordan or the West Bank. In Gaza, it's dwindled down to nearly nothing. Lebanon used to have a thriving Christian community. All of that is gone. As Christians, we need to understand that. Israel is protecting Christians and allowing Christians to thrive.